So a lot of that value is going directly to the boss, right? And so I think that more value needs to go to the worker and be placed on the worker's own labor.
Without the boss, you don't have to work. Is that correct?
Not in
The first Marxist quote I've got in my pen. Let's shift just a little bit, guys. You talked about a lot of countries that are socialist countries. Can you guys give me some of the prime examples of socialist countries right now? Let's talk a little bit about what's going on in those countries and how they've got to become socialist countries. Because certainly, I would consider the United States to be a capitalist country. I'm very familiar with that, but maybe not as familiar with these socialist countries.
So I would consider Bolivia to be socialist.
Okay.
I consider Venezuela to be largely socialist.
Okay.
I would consider Vietnam to be socialist and Laos.
Okay.
Also Norway, I would consider to be socialist.
Any other Scandinavian countries or just Norway?
No, the rest are social democracies. Now, historically, there are tons of examples of socialist countries, but only currently.
Let's talk about Venezuela a little bit. I feel like I've heard about them a lot.
Cuba as well.
Yeah, Cuba and Venezuela. I know we talked about Cuba, their automobile industry, not so driving right now, but let's talk a little bit about that. Tell me what's going on in Venezuela. Talk to me about the government, how socialism's run there, what's happened recently, why we feel like that's happened. Like I said, they've been on the news.
Essentially how it happened is in 2010, the previous president declared an economic war because of the shortages that were happening in Venezuela.
Shortages of?
Primarily oil. Yeah, primarily
Okay.
oil. Venezuela has always been heavily oil dependent, and their oil sale account was for approximately 98% of their export earnings and 50% of their GDP. And so when that dropped, like when oil prices dropped, that is, so oil output has declined and reached a new low in 2018. And so because of that, they had a lot of difficulty, trying to make a profit and trying to get money.
So all their economy was based on oil, 98%, I think you said, right? And so this wasn't a drop in supply, this was a drop in demand. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay, so the demand for oil worldwide decreased. So the demand for Venezuelan oil, which is 98% of their economy, decreased, right? And so that led to the economic turmoil they've got now. Tell me what if I flew to Venezuela right now, I'm not even sure you can do that. If I did, what would I experience in Venezuela?
Well, there's hyperinflation, hunger, disease, an increase in crime and death rates, and then mass immigration from their country to other places. The annual inflation is over 80,000%, which is extremely unbelievable.
That's not a good thing.
So I guess my question would be, why hasn't socialist economy, socialist government, why hasn't the government been able to stabilize and create more wealth in Venezuela?
Equilibrium, at least.
Or at least, yes, at least create stability. What's
Socialistic response to that, right?
right? What is the response?
What's the response? Or like, why haven't they been able to?
Well, so go ahead and start with what you were going to say.
Like, the main reason why they haven't been able to is because if 90% of their income was from basically oil, then that's mainly all of their workers working in an oil facility of some sort. And if that's not, if they can't sell it anymore, then they can't make money to pay the workers.
Okay, but wouldn't that be true in a capitalist economy as well? Supply and demand still works in capitalism as well, correct?
Essentially, so it's not directly because of the economic system, it's because of the demand decreased.
Okay, but if we were in a capitalist economy, for instance, here in the United States, we would say 98% of the workers were working in oil, perhaps, but now there are other job opportunities maybe that would come open. In a socialist economy, the idea is that the government, at least, or someone, is saying, is maybe limiting the job opportunities or something of that nature. What's the socialist response in order to fix the 98% unemployment? If supply and demand isn't working in terms of oil, what else can we supply? Is there a way to shift? How do we respond to that?
So I think in Venezuela's case specifically, the hardest thing right now for them to get past are the sanctions put on their oil. It's us in Saudi Arabia. We have a strong partnership for oil with them.
Okay.
So our sanctions, first off, decreases their profits. The other hardest part for them, and I think what they should do is invest in bringing different sorts of industries to Venezuela in the forms of factories, that sort of thing, to invest in that. But most of their reserves are actually held in the UK, and the UK has not given them their wealth reserves, so they have no money to invest in their own country right now.
Let's shift to, in terms of Venezuela's, what about healthcare and some of the things that you've brought up? How is healthcare and all of that working in Venezuela? Are they doing well, or are there limitations on social services, or just tell us, how's it going?
There definitely is in Venezuela. It is not going well.
So
Why is that?
what's the response of the Venezuelan government? How can they respond?
So they're accepting foreign aid, which is kind of like the last resort, and also since they don't have their own wealth to give, they're doing like local currency debt sort of thing, where you like pay them back. It's kind of confusing, but that's what they've presented to do.
Are they accepting foreign aid? Because the last time I heard, they were blocking aid.
They are accepting.
They are?
They are accepting foreign aid from the UN. They've accepted it from Canada. They've accepted lots from Bolivia and Cuba. They've accepted it from China. They are not accepting it from the USA.
So it's gotten so bad they've changed their mind.
Well, even from the start, they were accepting those countries.
Well, let's talk about Cuba for a second. Because you brought up the fact that was it what, 6-to-1 ratio or something with doctors. What was the ratio? Remember you brought
They
up?
have 46 doctors for every 10,000.
46 doctors
No,
for
that's in their case.
And doctors make 6 times the national average income. Is that what you said?
They have 64 doctors per 10,000.
Okay.
citizens.
So, I'm a teacher, not a doctor, so I don't make that much money. But as I understand it, with doctors, they tend to be decently wealthy, or at least make a decent amount of money and that sort of thing. You've got 64 doctors per 10,000. That would suggest that there's a decent amount of money flowing around. How is Cuba's economy operating?
Their economy right now is steadily on the rise. It's not growing at exponential amounts like an economy in Bolivia, but it is increasing at a steady rate, and there is more money, especially through tourism. They've opened up to tourism, and also in February they voted on a new constitution, which allows for private enterprises to invest in Cuba up to 49%.
So it seems to me then that they've moved more towards a capitalist stance if they're allowing private enterprise with the new constitution.
Yes, they actually have liberalized more, but the people and the government still control that because they will have 51% of any share.
Okay, so how is that wealth trickling down to the average person?
Yes. So, in terms of comparing Cuba to any first world developed nation, it's going to make it look horrible. And I'm not saying it's perfect at all, but it's going to make it look really, really bad. But when you compare it to other countries in Latin America and South America, it's towards the upper part of the middle of the pack.
How about compared to itself, say, 40 years ago?
So before the revolution, or
Well, the revolution happened way more than 40 years ago. Yes. Fidel Castro was in power for how long?
37, 38.
So compared to itself, say, midway through Castro's rule, how's it doing?
So it had an initial crash in the 60s, Bay of Pigs, Cold War, all that sort of stuff. Obviously, it's going to hurt an economy when you have extreme sanctions placed upon it. it grew after that. Again, not exponential rates. In the 90s, it crashed, and it crashed horribly. Largely, this can be attributed to the fall of the Soviet Union, which was its main trading partner.
Let's shift away a little bit. Let's come back locally. So the United States, we would agree, is a largely capitalistic society. Is that correct? Are there any hints of socialism in the way our society structure is set up?
Well, first off, you can probably say that any form of like Medicare or food stamps, government housing, that kind of thing is a socialist.
Social programs lend themselves to be socialistic? Okay.
But
You can also say public education, but for like our age, you can say that that means for socialism, because
How
along
so?
with free education, it's paid for with taxes, similar to the way that education was
Oh,
paid
you're
for.
talking about
Public school.
public school
Public school,
education.
like
Okay,
not like
you're not talking
college.
post-secondary?
No, I'm talking secondary school.
Okay,
You
okay.
can argue that that is also a hint of socialism.
Okay, because it's provided by the government?
Yes.
Okay. So we talked about healthcare in the form of Medicaid, right? What about the VA? Would you consider the VA to be socialistic?
I think
You would?
so.
Why?
It's a government-run
Mhm.
program to give money to veterans.
Okay, so yes, to provide health care for people who serve our country. Okay, would you say that standard health care in America, one hand, whatever my HSA card in my wallet says, or whatever my HMO card in my wallet says, versus Medicaid, Medicare, or the VA, which system do you think is operating better right now, on a whole?
So Medicare, out of any private, any sort of insurance in the United States right now, has the highest approval ratings.
Okay.
Actually, Medicaid does not.
Okay. So Medicaid, the VA, would you say that's running really well? Well-oiled machine, going great? No. Do you hear positive things about the VA or negative things about the VA when you hear about the VA right now?
I personally haven't heard much of it.
I haven't heard much about it either, personally.
Okay. You may not be listening close enough though. Okay. So I would submit to you. What's that?
You could ask my dad.
Absolutely, I bet you could.
Wait, that is, my
Yes.
grandfather did get some sort of payment from the VA or even special, and it's, I do recall him telling me that it is not working as he wishes.
I would submit to you that if you asked any number of veterans right now, and you said, where would you prefer to get your care from? The VA would not outpace private medical industry, right? In fact, the government, it's gotten so bad that the government has said, listen, if you're a veteran, you've served us, we love you so much, we want to make sure you're taken care of. If the VA can't supply it, and oftentimes they can't, you can go to the private industry and we'll have to compensate you back, because this system is clearly broken in many, many ways. So we've got two systems over here, Medicaid, Medicare, whichever way you want to go with it, plus the VA, that the government is almost wholly, actually is wholly running, that is really not going so well, and is clearly being outpaced by the private sector in such a way that this has to be pressure relieved by that. Yet we think that all of this should go to that because the government's running it so well.
No, I think it should go to a more Medicare-like single-payer system.
Single payer system. Who's the single payer though?
The government is the single payer, and then they pay to private doctors.
So if the government's the payer, who's running the system?
The government.
The government. So again, government run system. We feel like taking it out of private hands, putting it in the government hands, which is running the VA, Medicaid, Medicare right now, is our best option.
Into Medicare, yes, I do. It has the highest approval rating.
Okay, I'm gonna put Medicare aside. We'll start talking about Medicaid from now on. So Medicaid and the VA going so well that we feel like we should give the government more control and move them into the private industry. Yes?
I mean, it should be reformed.
Okay.
But, I mean, in my ideal situation, it wouldn't even be a thing.
But how would you respond to somebody who would say, when you put everything in the government's hands, what the government can give, the government can take, the government can ration, the government can limit, the government can decline? Don't you think that's a slippery slope?
Yes, and I think that's why the democracy is the most important thing for a nation. If the people want capitalism, let them choose it. If the people want socialism, let them choose it.
Okay, let's get practical. I think you would agree that there are more people leaving socialistic countries than there are capitalists trying to get into the socialistic countries. What is it about, what are those people missing? What is it that you know that they don't know that they're trying to leave and people are not trying to get into those countries?
So for me, I would personally say freedom of speech. I think that historically, socialist countries have been extremely oppressive of freedom to speech, and I do not think that.
Wait, what was your
I would
question?
also, well, repeat the question.
Well, the question was there, you know, we know people are leaving some of these socialist countries. We don't see a mass inflow of capitalists into those countries. What do those people leaving those countries know that you don't know? Why are they leaving if it's such a successful?
Well, in response to the lack of inflow of people coming into the countries, I would also say the people that are more drawn to a socialist type society might not always have the funds to transfer to another country. Because immigrating is fairly expensive. I don't have the exact numbers, but I have friends who are immigrants. Even immigrating to the U.S. capitalist country is expensive, just in general. So the people that are most benefited by the people that are most benefited by socialist policies and socialism itself are the people who are in need. Those people are not always going to have the funds to enter a country that could provide better opportunities for them.
So let me make sure I understand. Your theory is possibly that a lot of capitalists who aren't going to socialist countries aren't doing so because they can't afford to go.
I'm saying because the people who are most benefited by socialism are the people who are in need. The most wealthy capitalists don't feel a need to leave the country they're in because they are secure. There's not really a ton that they're lacking. If you're in the top 1%, if you're making tons of money in a capitalist society, why would you leave? But there's also people who are not making that much money. I mean, personal experience speaking, the people I know, they're like, yes, I would love to go to this situation, but I am not in a career where I currently make enough money to even think about moving my family to a country where we could get free healthcare because of how expensive the healthcare I already have to pay for is.
So what about the reverse? What about, because that's where you started, Dr. Parks, what about people who are leaving socialist countries in large numbers, maybe to say come to the United States, for instance?
I think a lot of those people that are coming in are searching for a new opportunity or basically a new life, a fresh start. Maybe.
Why can't they find that where they are, for instance?
From personal experience, at one point I did live in Guatemala, and a lot of people that I knew that lived in poverty desired to move to America because they knew that there were jobs that they could obtain there, and they couldn't obtain any jobs there, which I'm not for sure like the reasoning, but that they just knew that they could have a better job there, and it's also a lot safer in America.
Okay.
I'd say economic hardship. When any economy takes a downturn, there is immigration. So, I mean, an example I'm thinking of that fits this is Cuba in the 90s, horrible depression.
Mm-hmm.
And Cubans are leaving Cuba and they're coming to Florida.
Also, a lot of the people that are leaving and coming into like America have families. You don't see a lot of like single people coming in because they like if a mother is coming, the reason she's coming is because she wants her child to have a better life.
Let me switch gears for a moment, if that's all right as well. Just got a few minutes left. This is a Christian school. I'm not going to presume that everybody in the room is Christian, but we're a Christian school. So let's ask it from a Christian perspective. What are the biblical bases for either capitalism or socialism?
So the Bible doesn't strictly state that God is in favor of like either capitalism or socialism, but there are churches today that have reasoning for favoring either. Now, most churches lean towards capitalism, but the reason churches lean towards socialism, which I don't necessarily agree with, is because they believe that God calls us to give, and in a socialist society, we're giving more to the poor than a capitalist society. But
Is that always true?
But if we were to implement it in like America, the poor, it would even out more than it is right now. There are hopes for it is going to happen. But I think that personally, giving isn't a thing that should be forced or implemented on